Scott Benning, the man, the myth, the legend.
I don't know so much about that, but it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me to come on board with you.
Scott, listen, man, obviously, you know, me and you go back a couple of years.
Yeah,
And I really can't thank you enough for taking some time. I truly consider you a career mentor of mine. Remember, if you heard me talking about living your life in thirds,
yeah.
you're on that upper third I was always trying to achieve. And so I always want to say thank you for being that person and always being that beacon light of leadership that somebody can, and it wasn't just me, you had a lot of people, but for us to follow. So without further ado, though, let me kind of give a little background, toot your horn a little bit, because I know you're a humble leader as well. You'll notice the things that go on there. But Scott, from everybody knows, he was actually my command master chief, Naval Station Norfolk, back when I first made chief in 2004. Or I made it in 2003, but I think you reported in 2004, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And then you went on to be your pinnacle of your career. You were the fleet master chief for naval personnel and training.
Manpower, personnel training, and education fleet master chief.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So you were one of the fleets, one of the big dogs, and you didn't stop there, right? You could have easily just hung up your hat and gone to retire on your ranch, but you didn't. You wanted to keep serving. So, and I know there's certain things that you can do, but you're now the director of operations for the director of Navy staff of the Navy still now, right?
Yes, absolutely. So
still serving, Scott. When is enough for you, man?
in a couple more years, we'll get there.
Right. Well, Scott, thanks so much for joining me today. Because not only do you have an illustrious experience and career in leadership, but you've literally written a book, written the book about leadership. So it's The Power of Positive Leadership. And of course, I had the forethought. I would have grabbed my signed copy that I still have on my bookshelf over here. But man, this is a true honor. So, Scott, you heard me, how I've been going before. So I got to ask you a question. You all right? You ready?
I've been a little anxiety over this question here. So let's get at it.
All right. So you've been given an elephant. You can't give it away or sell it. What would you do with this elephant?
Can't give it away or sell it. I guess I'd ride it.
You'd ride it. All right. So you'd be rocking to the Pentagon on your elephant, right?
I don't know what else you would do with an elephant. It'd take a lot to feed it. So I can't sell it, can't give it away. So you might as well ride it.
Awesome, man. Great answer. Great answer. All right. So Scott, again, with the experience, I kind of have a little bit more insight because I've worked with you directly. For anybody who has not had the honor, and people are already sounding off about your book on Facebook, saying great book. The book that you wrote is called The Power of Positive Leadership, POP, if you will. And in this book, it was a great book, Scott. You really incorporate all your different lessons learned through your very extensive career. So that being said, why did you write that book? What inspired you to write that book?
So I look back through our time as serving, right? And so we have this wonderful thing called Sea Stories in the Navy. And Sea Stories is about passing on many of the lessons learned. We do that quite well through the CPO initiation process, induction process, whatever you want to call it today. We do a great job of passing on sea stories. And I really felt like I see Mick Pond Hurt just published a book as well. And he was a guy that I really started harping on that really needed to publish a book, right? Because they have tremendous success in the military. He goes out and, like yourself, starts his own business and has tremendous success there as well. And I said, these are our sea stories that continue after the Navy. And so there's much that we can learn. And if you look at the CNO's reading list, for example, there's a lot of books on there by flag officers. Mm-hmm. There are very few, if any, books by enlisted leaders. And I think that we have got to do a better job at that. Mick Pond West and his group have released a book as well. That's an outstanding book. I haven't read Mick Pond Hurt yet, but I look forward to it. I've encouraged Mick Pond Stevens to also write one. And for that matter, for anybody I see now Chief Petty Officers writing books, is talking about their experience, whether it be through diversity challenges that they've had. There are lessons that we can learn from each other. And you've talked a great deal about the learning from many different sources.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like reading is one of those skill sets that we're starting to put down to like 124 words, whatever you can Twitter nowadays, instead of understanding that we can really learn. My last year on active duty, I used to run around and talk to chief selectees and ask them to raise their hands. How many of you read nav admins? And I'd be in a group of 100 and there might be 10 that raise their hand. You know, and it's like, this is the primary source of how your Navy is communicating to you, your leadership responsibility and the things that you should know for your sailors. And really only 10% of you are reading them. And so you get after the development, your self-development and everything else that you do. And it's really about reading and learning from others, their experiences. And so I can, you know, you've had some great speakers here, and I so much appreciate everything that the Enlisted Leadership Foundation is doing to promote the growth of leadership. I can remember sitting in the Navy Region Southwest office, Command Master Chief office with David Deary, and him talking about this vision he had. And here it is, how many years later you guys are still going strong. It's just truly impressive with what you're doing. And so to any one of these speakers that you've had on your list here, I could take a book and apply to that topic a book that I've read on leadership, right? And so if we're expected to be leaders that grow our people, how do you grow your people without growing yourself? And so there's got to be an investment that you, and a focused investment that you make on yourself to grow so that you can continue to grow. The opening quote in my book is, "Life is a learning journey in which you will pass through many destinations. How will you remember those destinations? And more importantly, how will the people along those destinations remember you?" Right? And so it's all about self-reflection. It's about self-growth and reflecting each and every day about the importance of growing yourself so you can grow other people. How do you want to be remembered? If you're not thinking about what it's going to be like at the end of your career and how people are going to see you, if you're not thinking about that now, you're never going to grow to be that person.
Man, Scott, that's awesome. And it, you know, that I can actually see where that's applied. And I want to just take a quick second to tell a story about when we first met, because this is what resonated with me. So a little story about me. I'd just gotten off. I'd made chief in 2003. Immediately after deployment, the base sent me on an IA to the Middle East. Did what Nick did. I was protective service specialist guarding the general. But when I came back, at the time, they needed somebody to chair and run the CPO initiation season. Now, for those who don't understand how this works, that's generally not reserved for a second-year chief. That's normally like a senior chief or a very seasoned chief to take that role and lead all the committees through the entire tradition of the chief's initiation season. Well, here it was. I was a young second class, or just a 2-year chief, had not had really any experience as a chief because I was deployed the whole time. But of course, I get back and nobody had volunteered, and right before you showed up, actually. So I kind of slid in there. And I go, "I'll do it." And then you check in. I remember you pulling me aside and you go, and you were very direct with me. You're like, "You know, normally this should be a senior chief." I was like, and you remember you say, "I can't believe there's not a senior chief that stepped up to this. But you know what? Let's do this together." And you literally used this, the old saying of, you threw a fender down and pulled me alongside. And I remember I had to meet with you in your office every morning at 8 o'clock. Because you did not want me to fail. And I'll never forget that, Scott. And I say that, I wanted to say that story because that is what molded my vision of you to this day. And that was, gosh, almost 20 years ago, 17 years ago. So, Scott, everything you say truly resonates. So I appreciate that. Now, that being said, looking back on your career, what do you think your greatest weakness has been?
Oh, boy. My greatest weakness.
Not to put you on the spot, but we all have them, right? And I think sometimes that's the journey too, is to identify them. Guys, I can write a book on mine.
Yeah, my wife would probably tell you I have a lot of weaknesses. Which one is my greatest one?
Right.
I don't know. I can tell you a story, and you learn along the way, right? So you identify your weaknesses. Hopefully, you learn to get better at them. I'm not a great person to remember names very well, and so I would tell you that I struggle with that, and I have to work at that. And I think sometimes in the military, we get a little bit immune to that because the name's on the uniform. So we start to rely on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so throughout my career, I think one of the things that I regret, I don't know if you remember Admiral Guma Tao Tao. And
Yeah.
so what an amazing man, right? And so I met him when he was in Korea. And I was over in Korea in his AOR and had dinner at his house and met his son and his wife and his family. And here I am 5 years later, I'm in the Pentagon. And I remember him because he's a flag officer, but you can imagine the amount of people that he's met in his life. And he walked, "Hey, Scott, how you doing?" I'm like, holy cow, how did that guy remember my name, right? And so it's not that I don't remember people or remember faces. I'm just not very good at names. And so that, as you know, in building relationships, that's an important skill to have. And I wish I could be better at that.
Can I share with you my trick? Because just so you know, I'm absolutely afflicted with that as well.
Okay.
So I quite frankly have a cheat sheet. So every person I meet now, when I put them in my phone under the company name, I write how I met them.
Okay.
So that way, I'll remember how I meet you. I may not remember your name, but I always remember how I met you. I just can't get the name in my head. So I literally will search in my phone on where I met you, and it'll pop up, and I'll, "Oh yeah, John, how you doing, buddy?" So that's
understanding that's a weakness. I've read books on how to, stack your memory a little bit, and people to certain situations and so forth. And so, but yeah, great question. I think the understanding the weakness piece, I don't think people do enough. One of the greatest leaders I think I've worked for, and that was Admiral Ferguson as the Chief of Naval Personnel. And I think what he did very well, he used different tools to identify people that thought differently than him. So he was somewhat introverted, but I never seen an individual that focused so much energy on trying to surround himself with people different than he did, than what his thoughts were, right? And so, and we had a great team there because of that. And we made a lot of progress in some very tough and challenging times because he was willing to listen to people that were different than him.
Right.
And so I think everybody needs to think about that. If you're going to get into a leadership position, having an open ear, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. You're supposed to do a lot more listening than you are doing talking.
Yeah, my favorite
but
quote.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's just, identifying weaknesses. Good point that you make there.
And I bring it up because I think that I do agree. It's something that we all need to be humble about. And if you recognize them, I have a lot of weaknesses. Does that mean that has to define us? No, because what did you do? You're always working on trying, you recognize that. So you're always working on it, right? And I think that's really key. So if you look back on your career, because you've kind of looked at a lot of the other speakers, very similar, success just has followed you because you've always done the right thing. So, but if you look back on your career, what has been the most challenging obstacle you've had to overcome?
So I'm sporting I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'm sporting my GW t-shirt here today, right? And so Command Master Chief of the George Washington, greatest ship ever to sail the seven seas. And had a great leadership team on there with Cap Mercy and then Captain Mewborn, now Admiral Mewborn was the XO, Cap Mercy was the captain. And so just an amazing experience to learn as a leader to be in that situation. Most challenging experience was pulling into Key West with that aircraft carrier. We didn't pull pierside because there was nothing that can handle us, so we anchored out. And we had some, 2,000 sailors now on the beach in Key West. And the sea state in the river got so bad we couldn't run Liberty launches anymore. So here we were in a very popular time of the year to be in Key West with 1,700 sailors with nowhere to go, couldn't get back to the ship. And we're now trying to figure out where we're going to put them all. And I can recall there being pictures of sailors laying on benches around the base and stuff. It was kind of not a very good situation to allow people to run out and be out there all night long without any hotel rooms. And so there were many challenges about where we were trying to put people. Thankfully, the weather was good and stuff like that. And so, and then we started flying people out to the ship via helicopter, and we had to take bus them up to North Carolina. So something that we hadn't planned for, totally unexpected. with an awesome shore patrol officer at the time, myself and Eric Williamson, who was the Air Wing CMC. And we are trying to organize and get all these people to where they need to go, to where we could bed them down as much as possible, and then keep the uproar from happening, because everybody, believe me, we had them inside the fence line, had the gate closed, and boy, they all wanted to charge the gate and run over a couple of command mass chiefs. And so it was an interesting time, a very challenging time. You had to communicate a lot, right? And so it's exactly what I'm finding out in this situation that we're living in now, as we've gone to this mass teleworking experience now, is that in times of challenging situations, the communications have to be twice, if not three times as much now as if you're working in the office or in the current environment that you're used to working in. And so sometimes, your situation is going to change. You have to adapt. I think, Joanne Ortloff's discussion yesterday on change is an important one. A great book to read on change is My Iceberg is Melting. And so I would encourage you to read that book. Very quick read. It really gets you to a place of understanding. You better understand what change is, and then you better be ready to adapt to it. And so I would tell you that was probably one of my most challenging times right there, was just trying to keep 1,700 people satisfied, understanding the situation we were in and how we had to adapt to it and how we had to overcome it.
That's awesome, Scott. So, and thanks for sharing that. Because I mean, these experiences I think are really, it goes back to those sea stories, right? I think if people hear them, they can always take almost any sea story. And I'm a big proponent of that. You don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been, and you can learn where you've been from, these guys that have, had already been there. So try to learn from other people's mistakes or challenges before you have to experience them yourself. So that being said, so talking about, you've been my mentor for pretty much most of my career. How do you, because I know you've had your mentors too coming up. So if we say that, hey, you should live your life in thirds, and a third of your life should be trying to surround yourself by people and mentors or where you're trying to achieve, how did you go about establishing those relationships with those people who have already achieved what you've achieved?
Yeah, so I think you did a great job of describing that earlier, realizing at a very young age that I think my parents did a great job with me for that early on in my life, realizing that there were other people that I could learn from, allowed me to spend time with other people that would help shape me, and that sometimes you gain knowledge from people in the most unlikely places. And so there are some people in my childhood I could refer to, but really when you get into the Navy, it was all about, and David mentioned it yesterday about you can learn as much from bad leaders as you can from good leaders, right? What do you want in your toolbox and what do you don't want in your toolbox? And so at the end of the day, I take and I look to those leaders that I wanted to be like, and you pull something from them, and you actively seek that mentorship. You go to them and you say, I want to learn to grow to the level that you're at. You got to be honest, right? You're not going to create that relationship unless it's centered on trust and honesty. And so go to them and express that to them, and then start learning about it, and then be willing to do the work. There's a lot of people want to establish those relationships, but think that they're only going to get there by having a relationship. That relationship requires a lot of work by you as the individual that wants to achieve that success. I have a great friend of mine, Ray Brown, who was in the Navy for a couple of years and went outside and, just like Nick and Chris earlier, developed their own businesses, and he's highly successful. And you could say, wow, look at all that success he's had. But what you ought to say is, wow, how much work did he put into that, right? Because none of that stuff is easy. It takes a lot of work to achieve success. How do you measure success? What is success to you? And then how do you achieve it? And so there's so much that you have to dive into there in that relationship. If you want to keep that relationship alive and you don't want to do the work, you're not going to have that relationship, because the other person is going to see that you don't really value what they have to say to you.
Absolutely. So now, have you ever, and this is an important part, because a lot of people are afraid, you're afraid to take that step because they're afraid of the response. Have you ever had somebody who you were open with, you go to say, hey, I'd love your guidance, say, piss off? If you truly if you really opened up to them and say, hey, I would really love your guidance, Have you ever actually had somebody do that? Because I haven't. And
No, I
I
think
you've ever had that experience?
no, I haven't. I think you put yourself in their position, right? And what is there's a kind of like a pride, really, you want to be like me, right? Okay, let me tell you how I got there. And so
Right.
I think Chris and Nick also did a great job of talking about that, about how they reached out to other people out, but also how they help other people, right? And so when you realize other people want to help you be successful, you'll reach out to it. Those people that are not successful in doing what they're doing are because they're afraid to reach out and ask some questions. They're afraid to learn. Maybe they think they know it all, and then they quickly learn that they don't. So, hey, I know I want to jump into a couple things here right quick.
Sure, please. Yeah, because we have a couple of questions. I want to reserve, we have a few more minutes before Keith gets here, but I have a couple of questions, so I'll reserve those when you're done.
Okay, so I have one thing I want to talk about that's in the book and it's a CSAD, Coalition of Sailors Against Destructive Decisions, right?
Okay.
So the Mid-Atlantic region, 2008 is when we started CSAD.
Yeah.
And from that whole experience and generating those young sailors to create this group that's now continues today in 2020, which I think is pretty impressive that it's endured for as long as it has. From that, I thought about, reviewed that entire process, and one of the concepts in the book is ICE leadership, right? So sometimes you just got to chill out. And so ICE. So if you're watching this, you want to write down ICE, I-C-E, right? So the first letter I is inspire. I think as leaders, we have to be the type of person that other people want to be like. We have to be that person that somebody wants to come to and say, I want you to be my mentor. And so it's more about than just being a good chief petty officer or a good leader at any level. It's about the way you live your life. And so it's something that they observe. You cannot go home and do something that's inappropriate and come back to work the next day and expect somebody to respect you as a person and then want to be like you. So it's about how you live your entire life. Be the type of leader that can inspire other people to make them want to come to you and say, I want to be like you.
Love that.
Then
Down, by the way.
Then the C is once you're that type of person, you have to be able to challenge those other people. So how do you challenge? This is really where the leadership work begins, is because in the challenge phase, in order to challenge them, you have to equip them. You have to educate them. You have to train them. You have to give them the tools and the resources to be successful. I think, we talked about in the experience where you came into my office every day. That was about making sure there were no obstacles. That was about making sure you had everything you needed to be successful on the job. And if not, what do we need to do to overcome them, right? And so then to challenge you to go out and make it happen. And the great ones like yourself will go out there and do that. And they'll make it work, right? And then when I challenge you, the E is the empower. If I challenge you, if I've done everything right in the challenge phase, I can empower you to go do the task and not watch over you every single minute of the day, right? And so the empowerment piece, I have a great group of leaders where I am now, to the point that really I just steer them, right? And they go get it done because I've empowered them. And I don't become a roadblock for them because I feel like they're talking to the wrong people or something. If I give them a task, I expect them to do it fully and to communicate with whoever they need to communicate to get things done. And so the empowerment piece is get out of the micromanagement phase and get into the leadership phase. Don't be a dictatorship. That's a ship you don't want to be on. Be on the leadership and do leadership right. Inspire, challenge, and empower people to be successful, and they'll get there.
Man, Scott, that's awesome, man. We're giving you the due regards. I plan to use that. That's some good stuff right there, man. That's some good stuff. And I love it because what it does, it puts what people think, but it collates it into something that can be, you can put your finger on, like what was with Dave Braun yesterday. So that's awesome. So remember what that is, ICE. So write that down: inspire, challenge, and empower. Great stuff, Scott. All right, so I want to get to a couple of questions here before we bring in Scott. Well, first off, everybody is just giving you pretty accolades here. Loving your book. But first question is how do you balance self-care and self-improvement?
Well, that's a good one. I think really Mick Pond Stevens did a great discussion on that yesterday, right? The self-care piece is, so self-care is about mentally preparing yourself physically and spiritually. And so really, for me, like Mike, I'm very faith driven. And so that's important to me. So I read daily about that, and when I can go to church, can't right now, but we find ways to meet those in other ways. But then the physical aspect, right? The physical aspect is, what do you do to keep fit? You know, I'm struggling a little bit right now. I just had shoulder surgery, right? So now I'm going to physical therapy a couple times a week to get my shoulder built back up. And then the mental piece is, what do you do to continue to develop? I mean, sometimes in the job that you're in, you don't have a choice. I do a lot of reading for work right now to continue to steer us down the right path and try to meet the expectations from my bosses. And so mental, physical, and spiritual are extremely important. And then it is about setting an example. And I think, again, Mike did a great job of really talking about, if you're doing those things, you're creating an example in which other people will want to emulate. And again, I go back to my time on a GW with Captain Mewborn, who was the XO at the time, now Admiral Mewborn. And I spent a lot of time with him, and to the point that we were doing things to take care of each other. We would PT at the end of the day together. So, it'd be 1800 at night. I'd be on the treadmill and he'd be on a rowing machine or something like that. And we'd have some great conversations right there. But at the same time, we were releasing from just an extremely exhausting day, 12 to 15 to 20 hour days on an aircraft carrier. And so it's just, finding that balance is important, and never forget that your family is first. Right. So I will tell you that all the time. We sometimes feel like we can struggle in that area, especially being in the military with as much as we're gone. But there's nothing more important to me than my family. At the end of your career, you're going to walk away from the Navy. The Navy is going to continue to give back to you in many ways. But I am so grateful. I married my high school sweetheart.
That's awesome. And
we're still married today. And I have two great sons, and they have great families, and we're committed to being there for them. And so there's nothing to put, you got to know what your priorities are. My priorities are my family, and then comes service to others in the way that we do things.
Well, they always say the service first, family always. Right? I mean, Scott, man, I tell you, man, it's such an honor to have you here, man. Again, thank you so much for your time. There are a few more questions on Facebook that you're feel free to go and answer on your own. Man, Scott, always I love talking to you. Every time, even when we're all just catching up on the phone, man, you always inspire me to go to the next level. So thanks for everything you've done for all your sales, but for a very selfish reason, everything you've done to inspire me and allowed me to get where I've gotten today.
Thank you, Travis. We get there because of people like you, right? And so, so much appreciated. The time that I've been able to serve with you, to share with you, to continue our relationship is important. I want to leave the group with one more thought. I had a couple more leadership books that I would show, but you can go in the back of my book and see the 125 leadership books that I've read. One thought.
You could put them on the Facebook page. Yeah. Share them there.
So one thought, I was watching something last night, and Thomas Rhett was singing this song, and it's, "In a world full of hate, be a light. In a world full of hate, be a light." I want you to take a look in our world today and how much hate there is going on in the media and everything else. Don't fall into that trap. Be a light to a lot of people. If you can't be a light to a lot of people, be a light to somebody, so that we can start picking each other back up. We're only going to get through this if the light gets brighter for all of us. So again, thank you all so much for what you're doing. I know you got a great speaker coming up, and I don't want to dive into his time.
Well, Keith, jump on, man. Turn your camera on. Say hi to Scott.
Is my camera on? Can you see me?
Try it now. You're a panelist now. You should be able to turn it on now.
Okay. Let's see.
So, Keith is one of those people that's been a mentor to me. So,
well, Scott, I'm trying to get my camera on. I thought it was on.
Ask to start video. Let me see if I can get you to turn it on. I just sent you a request for you to turn your camera. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. So here's my first thing before you go, Scott. Here's the first thing, and this is at Travis, but it's about you. And Travis, you got me followers, man. Why you got me following a man like this, who lays down so many pearls of wisdom on leadership and has done a great job in this book that he wrote. Scott, I really admire what you've done, where you've been, and it's great. And following up behind you is really an honor. So keep doing what you're doing, brother, and hopefully our paths will cross soon once we can get out of virtual meetings and get into the handshake meetings again.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Keith, for me, it's been all about following you. Every time I came out to San Diego to come to the Fleet Family Service Center and see you while you were there and to see the great things that you continue to do, you've been an inspiration to me. And so thank you so much for being one of those people that I could go to be one of my mentors and to help me grow. I only got to where I was able to achieve what I felt was my level of success because of great people like yourself. And so thanks for all that you're doing. Keep up the great work that you're doing, and always know that you got a great friend here, and I love you, brother.
All right, bro.
Take care, Scott.
See ya.